Friends, we were talking about spectroscopic techniques based on X-rays. And in the last class, we talked about generation of X-rays, which are characteristic X-rays. Why we call them as characteristic is because they have fixed energies. Obviously, it means fixed lambda. Because energy E is hc by lambda. If the energy is fixed, lambda is fixed. And we said the characteristics X-rays come when there is not simply random scattering of electrons by a sample, but the electrons which have sufficient energy can knock off an electron from a particular shell. Let's say a K shell or a L shell or M shell. And if an electron from a K shell is knocked out by an electron beam which is falling on it, then another electron from higher shell drops into it, and then a certain energy is released, which is nothing but the energy difference between these two. If this is E1 and this is E2, and it is E1 minus E2 is what is released. And because we know that interestingly that all energies in these electronic configurations are all quantized, there are fixed energy positions, and because of this the E2 minus E1 or E1 minus E2 is also quantized. This delta E is also quantized. And now we know actually there are standard databases that are available for each of the elements. For example, if I take aluminum, what is the energy difference between let's say the K shell to let's say L shell, or energy difference between the K shell and M shell, or the energy difference between L shell and M shell? All these are known. And these are all standard values that are available in standard handbooks nowadays. So once I know this for each of the element, the whole periodic table, if this database is available, then what I can do is I start with the database and then collect the X-rays that are coming out of my sample. If my sample has some elements, I do not know what elements are these, and I simply what I do is I collect these X-rays that are coming out. And this collection of the X-rays is what is done by two different ways. One is that is where we use two different techniques. People refer to them as two different techniques based on how these X-rays are collected. One is called wavelength dispersive technique, or another is called energy dispersive. People call it as WDS or EDS. Wavelength dispersive spectroscopy, energy dispersive spectroscopy. Some people also call it as WDAX and EDAX, or some people also call it as WDX or EDX. Variety of terminologies are being used. For example, it comes as wavelength dispersive analysis by X-rays. That is the meaning of WDX or EDAX. In fact, there is a company by name EDAX. People call it as EDAX. In fact, many people use the term EDAX for this particular study. In fact, EDAX is a term which is the name of a company, so in principle one should not use this. It's like anybody saying Xerox. Xerox is the name of a company, so in principle we should say a photocopy or reprography or whatever it is, but rather than using Xerox. But everybody uses this term called Xerox. So whether the machine that I am using has come either from Xerox or come from HCL, whatever it is, but we still use the term called Xerox. Similarly, here the EDS machine, EDS being energy dispersive spectroscopy, or EDX, which is called energy dispersive X-rays. So this can be obtained by any company. There are so many companies which supply this kind of detectors. These are all basically detectors which detect these X-rays that are coming out. And one of them is the EDAX. There is also another company called Oxford. So So there are variety of companies, but somehow this term has become very popular. People refer to it as IDAX. But this is something one has to remember and avoid using the term IDAX because you are only promoting one particular company by using that term. So once you understand what these two terms mean, basically what we are doing here is either using the wavelength of the X-rays that are coming out or using the energies that are coming out. So what I do is, if I know that the X-rays are coming out now, the way it is done is, if it is done, this technique is used usually in tandem with either SEM or TEM. Very rarely EDS is used exclusively, because EDS or WDS are always used in order to find out a composition of a phase inside my sample. Let's say I have a matrix and a precipitate. I want to know the precipitate composition. I want to know the matrix composition. For doing that, first of all, I should know the microstructure. I should be able to see the precipitate. I should be able to see the matrix. Then only the question of whether I want to know this composition of that comes into picture. So that means it has to have the microscopy mode first. I should be able to see the microstructure. And if I want to have this microstructure seen at a very high magnification or at a high resolution, I can use either this or this. In principle, you can even attach possibly this to, even if you want to call it as an optical microscope, but the point is optical radiation that we are using does not have sufficient energy to knock off an electron from any of these. So I cannot use an optical radiation to generate X-rays. So that is the reason why you need to have sufficient energy radiation to create these X-rays. And that is usually can be obtained if I use a 20 kV or a 30 kV SEM or a 100 or 200 kV TEM. I have this energy is sufficient to knock off an electron from a sample, and as a result, this is what we regularly use. So we do not have a WDS or a EDS with an optical microscope. So you need a source of electrons or source of radiation which has sufficient energy to knock off an electron from a metal and to generate the X-rays. So first and foremost is I should be able to generate X-rays. So that means I should have some source by which I can generate electrons. So you can, whether you want to use it electrons or you want to use a laser or whatever it is to generate these X-rays. So X-rays have to be first generated. Okay, and once I generate X-rays, I have these X-rays generated from the whole region of the sample or a small region of the sample, depending on whether you are focusing the beam of electrons on a particle or on the whole region. In principle, I can focus my electron beam on this particle and get only the X-rays that are coming out from this particle and be able to know the composition of the particle. We will see in a minute. There is also problem with this kind of a technique. For example, the problem is if I look at it in a 3D in the depth dimension, I have a, let's say, a particle here. I have an electron beam which is falling on it. An electron beam has certain diameter. Every beam has a certain diameter. Usually the diameter of the beam that is used is of the order of around 1 to 10 microns. In an SEM usually it's about 10 microns or so. Unless I go to a FEG SEM where I am able to use a smaller. And if that is the case, if it is about 1 micron or so, then if my particle is a nanoparticle, then obviously this beam is not covering one individual particle, but if the beam is big enough that you have a particle here and the beam is covering a region which is outside the particle also. Let's say if I have a matrix with a particle size of the order of around 50 nanometers, or some particle in a matrix, let's say I consider this alloy to be an aluminum alloy and this particle to be Al to Cu. Then what happens is, if this Al to Cu particle is 50 nanometers and if my electron beam is about 1 micron, the moment electron beam falls on the sample, it interacts with this particle, and not only with the particle, with the matrix also, and there is what is called an interaction volume. usually this interaction volume will have a nature of a bubble. So the beam tries to penetrate through the material and then interact with a certain volume of material, and as a result the X-rays that are coming out not only from this particle but this whole volume. So as a result, now if I collect all these X-rays that are coming out and analyze them quantitatively, and if this quantitative analysis shows me that some percentage of aluminum and some percentage of copper, it is very clear that this percentage of aluminum and this percentage of copper will not match with the composition of this Al2Cu. Al2Cu is supposed to have 33% of copper and 66% of aluminum. 33.23 to be exact, let us say, something like that. And this is the composition of this particle. But now I can see that because this particle is not the only one which is giving you the X-rays, but the rest of the region is also giving. Even if your particle is bigger, for example, if my particle is, let's say, 10 microns, if this is the sample and my particle is, let's say, a 10 micron particle, it can be a particle which is a spherical particle, 10 micron size, let's say, or a plate-like particle which is 10 micron. Now if my beam that is falling on it, let's say, is of let's say 2 micron diameter or so. Now the question is, now this beam, the interaction volume of the beam, if it is completely covered within this particle, then I will get exactly the composition of this particle. But if my interaction volume is such that this is what is the interaction volume. So though I may see that the beam that I am putting is exactly on the particle that I am putting, the beam I know pretty well that it is not covering the matrix of my sample, but I do not know what is there below, because I am only seeing the 2D image of my sample. I am not seeing the 3D information of the sample, and I do not know by just looking at the particle whether it is a spherical particle or a disc type particle. It's just looking like a circular particle for me, but it may be a disc type particle. For example, Al2Cu is always disc type. So such discs, if they are present, and as a result you will be able to see that some of the region which is below this particle is also covered, and if this region is an aluminum region, then if I do a quantitative analysis, I will find out that the percentage of aluminum in my alloy, in this particle, it appears to show that it is greater than 33% of copper. I mean greater than 60% of aluminum. If this particle is Al2Cu, it should have 66% of aluminum and 33% of copper. But I suddenly see that when I analyze this quantitatively, I see the amount of aluminum is greater than this aluminum percentage. That clearly now tells me, if I do not know that this has Al2Cu particle, let's say I am getting 75% of aluminum and 25% of copper, I tend to feel this alloy is a Al3Cu particle. So suddenly if I do this analysis, quantitative analysis, and that quantitative analysis gives me an idea that there is a Al3Cu particle, then I get a confusion. Is there Al3Cu in this, or is it Al2Cu? So that is when you will have a confusion what kind of a nature of the particle it is. And if you can have some background information about the alloy and go back to the phase diagram and see whether there is an Al3Cu in that particular phase diagram, particularly at the composition of my alloy. If I know my overall composition of alloy, which is 4% copper, at a 4% copper in the phase diagram, what phases are possible, I can look at it. And if my phase diagram shows that it is only Al2Cu that is possible, but I am seeing a Al3Cu kind of composition, then I should understand that yes, this difference is coming because some of the matrix is also contributing to my diffraction, my composition. And as a result, because matrix being mostly aluminum rich, the aluminum content of the particle It appears the beam is falling on the particle, but I am not actually measuring the composition of the particle. So this is very, very crucial. Whenever we are analyzing whether it is by EDS technique or a WDS technique, I should make sure that my beam is as small as possible, so that the whole interaction volume is contained within the particle if I want to get the composition of the particle. If I do not have that situation, I will always get a composition which is not belonging to the particle, but it will be a mixture of particle and matrix composition that will completely confuse me. And particularly if I have an unknown system, it becomes a really problem, because I might be thinking that so and so compound is there, but actually it is possibly some other compound. So if it is a known system, okay, based on the knowledge about the system, I can assume that this is all coming because of the matrix. But if it is an unknown system, this problem is there, and one has to be very careful in doing this. So the smaller the particle, the more difficulty the situation is. So it is very, very difficult to detect the composition of very small particles. Small particles are always having difficulty in measuring, and the smaller the particle, the finer the beam that I should use. And that's why FAG-SEM is of great use if you want to find out the nanoparticles and the composition of the nanoparticles. One need to go to FAG-SEM and use beams. Nowadays, people also are able to use beams of the order of around 10 to 50 nanometer beams are also available. If you can converge the beam, and then with that you will be able to get the composition of an individual nanoparticle. But this is all about the issues related to the actual analysis. But let's simply look at what is the basic principle of these two. The principle that is used here, as I told you, is the way you detect these X-rays. Once I know the X-rays that are coming out have a fixed energy, that means they have a fixed lambda, I can in principle use this lambda to be able to detect the which X-rays are coming out. To do that, what I do is I put if my sample is giving these X-rays, if the X-rays are coming out, so what I can do is I can put a single crystal with a particular orientation, let's say a quartz crystal or any other single crystal with a fixed orientation, such that this plane is fixed. It could be a 1 plane or 100 plane or whatever such plane it is. So I make a single crystal with a fixed orientation, and once I fix the orientation, according to the diffraction principles, I know lambda equal to 2d sin theta. Once I know the lambda equal to 2d sin theta, if I have some the X-rays that are coming out have different wavelengths. Let us say I have aluminum K alpha inside the material, the X-rays that are coming out. If my material has aluminum and copper, I might be getting aluminum K alpha, I might be getting aluminum K beta, I might be getting aluminum L alpha or L beta, and so on and so forth. Similarly for the copper also, I may be getting copper K alpha, copper K beta, and L alpha and L beta. So all these, let us say all these 8 radiations with fixed wavelengths, all of them are fixed wavelengths, they are all coming. If they are all falling on this single crystal, because from this Bragg's law I can say that for a given crystal of a particular orientation, the D is fixed. D is interplanar distance. So once my A and HKL are fixed, then the D is fixed. So if the D is fixed, then I know that the theta depends only on the lambda. So that means if I keep this crystal at a particular angle from the surface, if this angle I fix it, then I will see among all these, okay, only some particular radiation which can match this particular thing. For a given, out of these 8 radiations, this is, let's say, copper K alpha radiation. Okay, for a given lambda, once the D is fixed, the theta is fixed. So until I keep this at that particular angle which corresponds to the K alpha of copper, it will not give me a diffraction at all. So what I can do is I can rotate this particular single crystal across a particular positions like this. I keep on rotating the single crystal along a particular arc, and at each of the place I hold it for a while and to see if it is able to detect any one of these X-rays, because out of all these X-rays we do not know which X-rays are coming out and what is the lambda of each of these X-rays, and for every given lambda there is a certain theta. So the smaller the lambda, the smaller the theta. So if I can keep it at a small angle, okay, it collects a certain particular lambda. If I keep it at a larger angle, it collects some other theta. So if I keep on rotating this at various angles and hold it at that particular angle for a certain sufficient period of time, I can see that at each case I keep collecting. So in this process what I am doing is I am collecting one by one, picking up each of these lambda separately, because when I am holding it at a particular angle, only one lambda is being picked up. No other lambda can be picked up, because for this angle theta, only one lambda can satisfy this Bragg's condition. Once my theta is fixed, lambda is fixed. So it is also possible that as I keep rotating at certain angles I may not pick up anything, because there is no lambda that is coming out which satisfies the Bragg's condition. So I keep on changing my theta by every 0.1 degree or something like that, and at each of these positions I keep on waiting to see whether I can collect anything. And as a result, this particular technique, what is called WDS technique, is a very slow process. Many a times it might take a minimum of 30 minutes to about an hour to actually collect the whole spectrum. One by one spectrum you are collecting, and what you are doing is you are going to plot now the intensity versus lambda. So I start with a lower lambda, let us say, which is for a smaller angle. As you can see, if the theta is small, lambda is small. So I start with a very small angle and see if there is a particular peak that can be a particular X-ray that is coming up, and I pick it up. And now I change the theta a little bit, that means I am changing the lambda. So maybe when I keep on increasing the theta, the moment I come to a certain theta, I may pick up another peak lambda. So depending on what lambdas are coming. And the height of this is going to depend on how many counts of this particular X-rays that are coming out. Depending on the amount of the particular element that is present, I would have the intensities of these going to be decided. In an X-ray diffraction, we said the intensities in an X-ray is a function of what we said is structure factor. Right? So we said I is square of the structure factor. And the structure factor is basically how much of diffraction is taking place from each unit cell. Here it is not related to that. Here it is depending on how much of that element is present. So as a result, if more number of atoms of a particular element is present, more number of X-rays are going to come out of that. And as a result, if I can hold on for a sufficient length of time, and I will be able to pick up all of them. Again, this is very important. If the time that is being held at each of the theta position is short, that even though there may be a lot of X-rays of that particular lambda are coming, you are not picking up all of them. That is the reason why this WDX is very slow. You need to hold it until you make sure that no more X-ray of that particular lambda is coming and being detected by this particular detector. Until then, you have to wait and collect all the packets of this particular X-ray that are coming, and then only move to the next. So by moving from one by one to various theta positions and holding out at each of the position, you will be able to collect all of them. And once I collect all these, and because I have this database is already available, I match these peaks with that database. And from that I can assign, let's say this is aluminum K alpha, this is copper K alpha, this is aluminum L alpha. Can we say K alpha, L alpha, which is having a higher lambda? It depends. It depends on how it is. For example, if I am talking of K alpha, if this is K, L and M, K alpha is this energy. This is K alpha, right? L alpha is this energy that we are talking. Depends on which element that we are talking. Sometimes it is possible that K alpha may be larger than L alpha. If the K alpha is larger, then the lambda is smaller. So it is possible that the K alpha has a lower angle than the L alpha, or it is possible also that the L alpha may have a lower angle. Depends on exactly what is the energy differences. So, but once I have this database completely available, I may be able to detect each of them, and I will be able to index these peaks. The way I index XRD peaks, I can index these peaks, and once I index these peaks, then what I need to do is I don't need to, if both K alpha and L alpha peaks are of a particular element are present, I don't need to bother about each of them. I simply pick up one of them and find out what is the area under this peak, and find out the area under this peak, and from the area under the peak I will be able to find out what is the amount of the phase present. So amount of the element present, not the phase. So from that I can say what is the extent of the element present in various phases. For example, whether I am talking about a precipitate or a matrix, and from that I will be able to do this. So this is how we can actually get to know the compositional information from individual region. So I can put my beam on this particle and get what this spectrum, and from that I can find out what is the composition of that particle. But keeping in mind this difficulty which I just now mentioned some time back, that depending on the interaction volume of the electron beam with the sample, you may have certain difficulties that the matrix also is playing a role when you are trying to get the composition of the particle, depending on how big is your beam diameter vis-a-vis the diameter of your particle. So as long as your diameter of the particle is much bigger when compared to the beam diameter, then absolutely there is no problem. So this is something which has to be understood, and one can find out this and get to know what is called the individual quantitative information of the particle. Of course, there are also problems. What are the problems? Problems are associated with fluorescence, for example. So people have to do fluorescence corrections. For example, that the X-rays that are coming out from this copper, you are assuming that these X-rays are all being collected by the detector. But it is possible that if I have a sample, the electron has fallen into it, and you have a particle which has aluminum and copper, and the X-rays are generated. Now the X-rays are coming out. When the X-rays are coming out, these X-rays may interact with the region here. And some of these X-rays may be used, because they are also energy radiation, that may be used to knock off an electron from some other atom which is sitting there. So it loses its energy. So you are not actually detecting this X-ray that is coming out. Maybe some other X-ray may come out. So as a result, you are losing the energy of this the X-ray beam which is coming out, and this loss of energy is what we call it as fluorescence, and one need to correct for this fluorescence to be able to exactly know what is the. This is more importantly to find out the actual intensities. You may have actually a certain percentage of element in this, but the actual intensity may be lower because the intensities are lost. So as it comes out, though the X-ray is coming out with a particular energy, with a particular lambda, but the total number of packets of this energy that is coming out may be lost, because some of these packets have already interacted with something else and they have lost their energies. So when you are actually measuring this, you will be able to see this. In fact, I was mentioning when I was talking about X-ray diffraction, this problem we also have when we have, let's say, an alloy containing a phase such as alpha iron plus Fe3C, let us say. We say we have a problem of what is called atomic scattering factor. The atomic scattering factor being very small, though you have a certain amount of this phase, but that intensity is not reflected by the amount of the phase. For example, if I simply take an example of, let's say, if you have a simple example of aluminum and tungsten. If I take something like about 50% of aluminum and 50% of tungsten, and subject this powder mixture, if it is a powder mixture, let us say, subject it to X-ray diffraction, I am supposed to get a mixture of peaks. Some peaks of tungsten, some peaks of aluminum. And if I look at the most intense peak of tungsten, which is 110, and most intense peak of aluminum, which is 111, In principle, I expect, because it is 50-50, I expect the height of these two to be the same. If the height is representative of the amount of the phase. But height is not always the representative of only the amount of phase. It is also representative of the amount of phase. But it is not representative of only the amount of the phase, and that is where the structure factor comes, the atomic scatter factor comes into picture, because I is square of structure factor and F is, as we know, small f into e power 2 pi I hx plus ky plus lz. So this F is important. And this F for tungsten is much higher than F for aluminum. So you will see that the tungsten peak will be much bigger than aluminum peak. So this problem is there, which has to be corrected to be able to find out the amounts of individual elements that are present. Similarly, your alloy may contain a lot of aluminum, but the actual aluminum peak may be smaller because the K alpha that is coming out of aluminum may be lost because of another element that is present, whose the energy that is required to knock off an electron can be supplied by this K alpha of the aluminum that is coming out. So as a result, the aluminum will lose its energy, so it will show it as a smaller peak, though it is actually a larger. So these corrections, people regularly correct it, and with that we will be able to find out the exact values of the amounts of the elements that are present. And most of these softwares have these corrections incorporated so that we get the correct values. So this is all about how to use wavelength dispersive, where I am using the wavelength as the measure of the X-rays that are coming out. But in addition to the wave, but the problem with this technique, as I mentioned just now, is the time. It takes a long time. Every spectrum collection will be a minimum of half an hour to 1 hour. So as a result, many people have difficulties in using that, because everybody would like to have his analysis done very fast. And also you need to have this single crystal to be perfectly made with a particular plane, and this plane should not be contaminated by anything. So you need to have the vacuum maintained and things like that, so that you can collect it. One more important problem that we always feel is that when you have a sample, okay, and X-rays are coming out, these X-rays go through a small window and then collected by this detector, which is kept outside. The whole SEM system is one, and the detector system is separate. So the detector, the X-rays to the detector go through a window, which is usually either a beryllium window. Generally people try to use a low atomic number window, so that the X-rays that are coming out are not getting lost by the electrons in the window itself. So they use a very thin window. Nowadays there are also certain microscopes that are coming up which are called windowless technique, where there is no window used, and they somehow maintain that this particular detector is able to collect all the X-rays that are coming out. So there can be some loss here also. One has to keep that in mind. And with all this, what you see is that you lose a lot of time in this particular technique, but you get a very high resolution. One important thing in WDS is resolution of, what do you mean by resolution? I am not talking of spatial resolution. I am talking of resolution of energy resolution. Okay, so I do not want two peaks of aluminum K alpha and copper. For example, the problem with in a aluminum silicon alloy is this problem. If I am working with aluminum silicon alloys or iron chromium alloys, anytime you have two elements with very close atomic numbers, you have a problem. For example, if I am working with a stainless steel with iron and chromium, you will always see that iron and chromium more or less overlap. And when they overlap, then it becomes very difficult for you to distinguish how much of iron, how much of chromium. And that is where the WDS, because the lambda equal to 2d sin theta Bragg's law is a very accurate law, that even a small difference in lambda will make a small difference in the theta. So it depends on what is the step size that I use in moving my goniometer, my single crystal. Am I using 0.1 degree or 0.01 degree? Obviously that is going to change the time of total spectrum collection. But if I can use a smaller step size, I am able to clearly differentiate between different things, and I am able to collect the X-rays separately and be able to separate out, and as a result the resolution is going to be much higher. Whereas the next technique that we are going to talk about, which is a EDS, has this problem that the resolution is limited. And here what we do is we use the energies of these X-rays. As we said, these are all various K alphas that are coming out, starting from whatever aluminum or copper K alpha. So different energies are coming out. What we do is you send again these X-rays onto a crystal, which is usually people call it a crystal, silicon lithium crystal, and which is a semiconductor. And in a semiconductor, you all know that there is a valence band and a conduction band, and there is an energy gap between these two. And in case of silicon lithium, generally it is about 3.8 electron volts or so. So the moment you have an X-ray with a certain energy is coming and falls onto this, it can take an electron from a valence band to a conduction band. So it can excite the electrons in the valence band and take them to a conduction band, and can generate what are called electron hole pairs. And the number of that electron hole pairs that get generated is going to depend on what is this energy. So if a particular X-ray, let's say copper K alpha, is coming out with a certain energy called E, that E divided by 3.8 is going to tell me how many number of such electron atom pairs or hole pairs are going to be generated. And so once I keep such a crystal and then collect all these X-rays that are coming out, here the advantage here is I am able to do everything together at a time. I am not doing step by step. Here what I do is I rotate the sample, rotate my single crystal to every particular angle. At every one particular angle, I am only collecting one of the X-ray. Whereas here all the X-rays that are coming out will fall on this, and each of them will excite this, and each of them will generate certain number of electron hole pairs. And if I can look at how many such electron hole pairs are being generated from each of these, then from that I can find out what is the particular energy that is coming out. So I correlate the number of electron hole pairs to this energy and correlate this the energies finally to what elements that are present, whether it is aluminum K alpha that is generating these electron hole pairs, or it is copper K alpha that is generating electron hole pairs, because this energy is fixed. So that is how now what I do is I collect all these that are coming out, the electron hole pairs, which are again magnified by certain what is called field effect transistor. There is so usually this system looks something like this, that you have X-rays that are coming into your detector system, where you have a silicon lithium crystal, and from this you have electron hole pairs that are generated, and you have another kind of field effect transistor which will amplify this signal that is coming out, and this is finally detected by your detector, is measured. So you are actually going to measure the total number of such electron hole pairs that are generated, and from that you basically convert this into what is called the energy versus intensity. Instead of lambda versus intensity, you are simply going to plot energy versus intensity. The information that you get is exactly going to be the same, excepting that what you are utilizing is going to be different. In the previous case, I am utilizing the lambda of the X-rays, and here I am going to utilize the energy of the X-rays. So the only problem is silicon lithium crystal is stable only at very low temperatures. So you need to maintain the silicon lithium crystal at very low temperatures, and so you use liquid nitrogen to be able to hold this silicon lithium crystal. And so that is one of the difficulties in this whole system, that you need to maintain this material. So you have to continuously, if you want to use a EDX system, every day you need to pour liquid nitrogen into the container. so that the liquid silicon lithium is always maintained at that particular low temperature. Otherwise, the moment temperature is higher, there is always a thermionic emission kind of, so the thermally the electrons get shifted from this. So in order to maintain this silicon crystal, so that it is accurately maintained at a particular temperature, so that only the energy of this particular X-rays that are falling are